A few key reads on the housing market this week doing little to ease concerns about this prolonged downturn. CNBC's Diana Olick has the full rundown.
Michelle, mixed reviews in the still shaky housing recovery. A slew of data this week show home sales bounced back ever so slightly after the big drop-off following the expiration of the homebuyer tax credit. Sales of existing homes came back 7.6% month to month, but are still at the second lowest level in 15 years. Sales of new construction struggling to compete against rising foreclosures were unchanged in August, the second worst month on record. Homebuilder confidence is still weak, with most new starts in August in multifamily construction. Builders noting that more Americans are choosing to rent rather than buy. The big question mark now, though, is home prices. After recovering somewhat thanks to the tax credit, they're taking a turn for the worse again. A government report showed them falling again in July after significant weakness at the end of June. That has experts pushing back their forecast for recovery. Realtors say it's a waiting game to see if the housing market can stand on its own without government stimulus. Michelle?
Diana, thank you. So what are this week's housing numbers telling us? Have we finally reached a bottom in housing, or is the American dream turning into a complete nightmare? Joining us now, Brian Westbury, chief economist at First Trust Advisors and author of It's Not As Bad As You Think, and Shari Olefson of Fowler, White & Boggs. Ladies and gentlemen, good to see you. Brian, let me start with you. Does the book title apply to the housing market as far as you're concerned? Is it not as bad as we think?
Yes. You know, the American dream isn't over, so I know you were using that as a way to lead into this topic, but it's definitely not over. We had the government supported housing, $8,000 a tax credit up through April. It put an artificial boost in housing. We're now in the hangover period of that, although it looks like we're starting to feel a little bit better. This is an artificial low that lots of people are extrapolating into worse things. No, it goes higher from here. This is, you know, the only reason we've been down in the last couple of months is that we were artificially boosted in May and April in the spring. Okay. It was all because of this government stuff. So we drew a step forward, is what you're saying. Shari Olefson, do we go lower from here when it comes to housing? What do you think?
We're going to go a little bit lower, Michelle, but nothing like what we saw before. And the reason for that is that the bubble is over. It's ancient history now. But we still have a little bit of adjustment to go. What I think is going to be more significant for most Americans, rather than a little bit more of a price decrease, is going to be the long time that it will take for prices to appreciate again. And that's because normal appreciation in real estate is lower single digits. It's nothing like what we've seen before. And, you know, we're coming off of this huge boom. It just makes everything feel a lot worse. With about a third of personal wealth tied up in households, it's going to feel like we need to save more than spend.
Let me just say that I don't agree with Shari about that, in the sense that every housing recovery in history has been a V-shaped recovery. Now, this was a big bubble, and we had a very low trough, but we should have a V-shaped recovery. Also, your last segment talked about the inflation that's coming. Well, that will affect housing prices, too. So both of those things can lift this market much faster than people believe.
Shari, I'm going to tell a little personal story here about a condo in Fort Lee, New Jersey, back in 1998. I looked at 20 condos in a weekend, and every single individual was selling at break-even or a loss from 1987. That's how much they had overpaid.
Wow.
They didn't see any V-shaped recovery.
Well,
so I don't know that I believe you there.
Well, if you look at housing starts or existing home sales or new home sales, all you got to do is go back and look at the last 30, 40 years of history. I don't know about that particular condo.
You know, when Americans think recovery, they think pricing. You know, they don't think sales numbers.
And we've got a big issue with supply and demand right now. I mean, just the overhang of supply is tremendous. Several years worth, if you count the shadow inventory and the 7.5 million units that are still in default or foreclosure, and weakens on the demand side as well, because so many people are just out of the market. And so far, the government has really been focusing on spurring demand. I think we really need to be focusing on easing the entry of that supply into the market a little bit, similar to what Fannie Mae is doing with the lease and hold program now.
Well, I think one of the biggest problems with housing is the appraisal process and the effect of over regulation on our banking system right now and on the housing system.
Why?
We do not have a truly functioning mortgage market like we've experienced over the last 20 years. The appraisal process is now correcting on the downside where it did it on the high side
there's a lot of anecdotal evidence out there.
The reality I'm hearing about.
Yeah, the appraisers don't want to. They're scared to death of going too high, right? So they keep going lower.
And they've been put in the middle of it all.
Right, and we don't know what's going to happen with the GSEs this year either, which is going to have a big impact on how available already tight mortgage money is for people, which is why I think it's just going to be a long time before all of this evens itself out.
I think if the GSEs went away, the private market would fill the gap.
Absolutely.
Whether you want the GSEs or anybody else, mortgages need to get tougher to get and more expensive.
You're absolutely right, Michelle. And let me just add one more thing, and that is people still need a place to live. So even if foreclosures are going on, we still need to add 1.6 million units to the housing market every year just to keep up with population. We do have some overhang right now, but it's not enough to take away from the population growth. We're going to have to come back, and that's one of the things we're seeing in multifamily housing right now.
But I guess this segment is probably different things to different people. If you're watching and your house is underwater, you're thinking this is pretty negative because, my house is not going to recover in price for a very long time.
Right.
If you're an interested buyer, though, prices are coming down, interest rates are still very low, and if you're going to live in it for a long time, maybe now is the time.
It's a long-term investment. We're going back to real estate as a long-term investment, and we're also going back to, a much higher rental market and rental population in this country. As Brian said, we're seeing increasing numbers in investment.
Mobility, flexibility. There's nothing wrong with renting. You can downsize quickly if you get in trouble. It's so much better.
It's also, and what's interesting right now, if you look at rental cost and building cost, the housing prices that exist today for the first time in about 5 or 6 years are actually a good value. We're below what we would call our model's value, and that means this is a great time to buy for the long-term appreciation. I think prices are going to go up a little bit faster than Shari does, but we both agree that prices will head higher over the next few years.
Yeah. And Brian, that we're using appropriate valuation methods now.
That would be an improvement, wouldn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, good discussion. Thanks for coming on, Brian and Shari Olefson.